Muted chat. Okay. Let us begin, chat poggars. Poglords. Let me find one or two things real quick. Yes, this is great. Okay. Welcome to another Healthy Gamer GG stream. My name is Alok Kanoja. Just a reminder that although I am a medical doctor and psychiatrist, nothing we discuss on stream today is intended to be taken as medical advice. Everything is for educational and entertainment purposes only. If y'all have a concern, a medical concern or question, please go see a licensed professional. This is especially true of today's stream because today we are going to be talking specifically about diagnosable illnesses. So we're going to get to that in just a second. So we're going to even do our disclaimer again. And we're going to talk a little bit about this, okay? But before we do that, let me... I just want to catch up with y'all for a second. Is that cool? Can we just hang out for like a minute? Because I haven't streamed on Twitch in like a couple of weeks. I was sick last week, so we were going to do an interview. And today... So a couple things. We're streaming today, tomorrow, and Friday. So we have left y'all, we have neglected Twitch over the last couple weeks. I want to say like we had a couple of really awesome streams in May. And then like June, we kind of slowed down on Twitch for a little bit. So I miss y'all. I'm glad I'm back. So we're going to try to make it up to you. We're going to do an interview tomorrow, interview after that. But this is something that I really wanted to talk about. On the, before we kind of hop in, we also wanted to tell y'all something that we launched back in May. For those of y'all that got the exclusive invite, thank you very much for participating. We have resource packs, which have gone live. So resource packs are curated YouTube videos along with like key learnings and even some exercises and worksheets that have been assembled for y'all. So we've run into a problem streaming on Twitch, which is that we can talk about something today, and tomorrow, if you miss the stream, you're like, you ask the same question, right? So now what we started to do is we started to stick videos on YouTube so that people can like find them later, right? But now the problem is like we've got over 800 videos on YouTube. And a lot of them are really fantastic. And some of them are like really old and really scuffed, but they're really great. So what we've managed to do is, and there have been people in our community that have been struggling with an issue. And over the course of like 2 or 3 years, they have like turned their lives around. So these people will approach me on the street. They will post on our subreddit. They will like thank us in all kinds of different ways. And then basically what happens is members of this community have started to put their lives together or put their lives together at the 3-year mark. And so now the question is, if you're just joining today, how do you walk that journey? So what we've managed to do with resource packs is put together like anywhere from like, I want to say 5 to like 10 or 12 videos on a particular topic. Because I will do an interview one day. We'll like talk about it over here. We'll take this angle on it. And so we've assembled like stuff about motivation, stuff about studying, stuff about communication and relationships. And all like the content is out there and it's been kind of assembled. So if y'all are really interested in tackling a particular problem, check out resource packs. Okay. They're free, by the way. So, so like, For those of you, I noticed that a couple days ago, people have like tipped us money and Prime subbed and whatever. So for anyone who has supported us so far, whether that is signing up for coaching and supporting us financially that way, whether that's purchasing Dr. K's guide, whether that's tipping us, subbing to things, Prime subs, like whatever, even watching this and helping us generate ad revenue from like YouTube and Twitch, y'all have all been a part of building this stuff. And so we're committed to investing the stuff the resources that y'all give us, right? Y'all are mining our minerals. Y'all are like we're getting our minerals and gas from you. And what we build and how much we can build depends on how many, Vespine geysers we're accessing. So thank y'all very much for all the support. And even today, so for example, like this lecture, I hope is going to be good. And I hope it helps a lot of people. I'm really excited about it. And I think it really will help a lot of people. And so that we're able to do this because of the support that y'all give us. And so, yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm sure there's all kinds of analogies to be made about, maybe one day we'll talk about the story of HG and how we built 2 Vespine geysers and didn't have enough people on minerals, and then we got Zerg Rush and how that set us back and how we've managed to, I don't know. I'm sure there's an analogy somewhere in there. Okay. Cool. So Tawny Cat is saying coaching is awesome. I had 6 sessions one-on-one and damn, it was a kick in the rear I needed. That's why we did it. We did it to kick Tawny Cat's ass. We are the only people on the internet that you can pay to kick your ass. But with love and compassion and accountability and help you move forward in life. Easy. Did you want to discuss something? No, I missed y'all, to be honest. So this is for me. So yeah. Just clicked on the stream. The first thing I hear is kick ass. Well, strap yourself in, iCarlos TV, because we're just getting started. Okay. You guys want to vibe for a bit, or y'all want to like dive in? Y'all here for we're learning, right? Let's learn so that we have plenty of time for questions. Does that sound good? Dive. Let us dive. Okay. We will dive. All right, chat. Okay. All right. So today we're going to talk about psychosomatic illness. Now, psychosomatic illness is interesting because I think it is one of the things that is the most misunderstood in like basically all of medicine. So a couple of very common misconceptions. People with psychosomatic illness think that their minds are weak, and other people judge them for their minds being weak. This is false. Second thing is that people think that psychosomatic illness means psychological. That's what it's come to mean. We use this word psychosomatic, but basically like your doctors are like, yeah, it's all in your head, right? And when someone else hears that term, they mean like, oh, it's all in your head. Yeah, there's something going on in your body, but it's like mostly in your head. Oftentimes, if you get diagnosed with a psychosomatic illness, what doctors will do is refer you to a therapist, because we have all of these studies that show that psychotherapy is effective for psychosomatic illness. Which in turn, if like psychotherapy is effective for it, that means that you're kind of screwed up in the head, right? Because if a therapist is helping you, that means like it's all up here. False. So one of the biggest problems that we have with psychosomatic illness is because psychotherapy is helpful for it, we reverse the idea that it is in your head. The other problem is that the origins of psychosomatic illness were oftentimes like discovered by people like Sigmund Freud. So Sigmund Freud like had this patient who was like having really bad periods. And he was like, oh, this is a problem within subconscious mind. Und that is why she is having these menses that are so out of crazy. It's all of this hysteria and it all has to do with her mind and she does not know how to regulate things in her uterus. This is a problem. So early on in our research, we sort of have this like psychological like idea that these problems, the problems of your uterus are born in your subconscious mind. There is some truth to that, but as we've discovered now, the truth is actually really different, okay? And then the last thing is that there are a couple of other like common misconceptions. One is that people, if you struggle with psychosomatic illness, or if you know someone with psychosomatic illness, oftentimes we have this idea that they're doing it for attention. Or people will judge you and say, you are doing it for attention. You keep on having a stomach ache and you're doing it for attention and it's not real. And it pisses off people around you. They're super judgmental. Or if you're on the receiving end of having a loved one with a psychosomatic illness, you get pissed at them. And you're like, fucking A, like on my wedding day, you have to have your GI problems again. There's this idea that we do it for attention. Okay? That is also basically not true. There's some truth to that, but it's not the way that we think. So what we've learned over the past 20 or 30 years about psychosomatic illness is revolutionary. And the basic problem is that physicians are not trained in this, okay? So what do we mean by psychosomatic? That means there is a psychological component and there is a physical component. And what we're going to learn today is that the way that our system of medicine, like Western medicine, is set up is very, very bad at treating psychosomatic illness. So I'll give you all a simple example. So if you've got a psychosomatic illness called POTS, postural orthostatic tachycardic syndrome, you may get referred by your general practitioner or primary care physicians to a cardiologist. And a cardiologist is like, yeah, maybe I can give you some medicine, but what you need to do is you need to go see a therapist. And then you get referred by a psychologist, and a psychologist will do psychotherapy on you, but the psychologist doesn't understand the cardiovascular component of it. So what we've managed to do in our system of medicine is we send you to two different specialists, each of whom knows their particular thing, but doesn't understand how these things are all connected. So we do a very bad job in Western medicine of treating psychosomatic illness because, like, for example, POTS is associated, 44% of people with POTS have a history, 44% of people with POTS, I think, in one study, have a history of sexual abuse or physical abuse, okay? Now, if you go to the cardiologist, what is the cardiologist going to say? They're going to say, okay, like, go see a therapist for that piece, and I will handle this stuff. So if you go to a psychologist, we also know that there are dysregulations, we'll go into what POT is, with your, like, cardiovascular system, right? And the psychologist doesn't know anything about that, so then they send you to the cardiologist. So these are both parts of the disease. But like, you can't treat them in isolation. So today what we're going to do is we're going to explain to y'all where psychosomatic illness comes from. We're going to like understand how our mind and our body is a homeostatic unit. What does that mean? So if my blood pressure drops, it is detected by receptors in my throat, basically. You know, like when people do like chokeholds and they like make people pass out during like these like spy movies. They're not actually cutting off oxygen flow. They're actually squeezing both of your carotid baroreceptors and inducing a blood pressure drop, which makes you pass out, okay? So we detect blood pressure up here. And when our blood pressure drops, these things send signals to our heart. Let's pump harder, baby. They also send signals to our kidneys. Let's absorb more volume. Let's absorb water. Because if you have a closed circuit, like a pipe, right, like a blood vessel, and the pressure is low, what can we do to increase the pressure? We can squeeze, okay? We can go from here to here. This will increase the pressure. And we can increase the volume on the inside. both of these things will increase our blood pressure. So the body works as a whole system. The biggest problem that we have in Western medicine is we have separated the mind from all the other organs. So today we're going to understand that the mind is no different from any of the other organs. And if you really want to get a good handle on psychosomatic illness, you have to understand how all these things combine. Now, this is very important for y'all to understand because I hate to break it to you, but very few, even medical doctors or psychologists, will understand this level of thing about psychosomatic illness. Because what do we do in our system of medicine? We have specialists, right? So I'm going to become an expert in the heart. But as I learn more and more about the heart, I don't know so much about healing trauma. And if I'm a psychologist, I don't even get a single hour of medical training on how the heart functions. So what happens when there is a disease that is not localized to one organ system? What happens when you have a disease that the disease is not in one piece, but is in the way that all of the units of your body connect to each other? And that's where psychosomatic illness exists. So unfortunately, you're going to have to become an expert in this. If you have a psychosomatic illness, you have to be the expert, because very few medical doctors or psychologists or therapists will have the multidisciplinary perspective that it takes. And my goal today is, over the next hour, I want to make you an expert in your own psychosomatic illness. What I found as a physician is that, especially when it comes to this set of diseases, having an educated patient is the best treatment. Okay? This is one place where, unfortunately, y'all are going to have to be the expert. So let's start by understanding, what do I mean by psychosomatic illness? So we're talking about illnesses like irritable bowel syndrome, or IBS, fibromyalgia, which is a pain syndrome, POTS, which is postural orthostatic tachycardic syndrome. Okay? We're going to go over the basics of psychosomatic illness, and then we're going to use these 3 examples to illustrate certain points. But there are all kinds of other psychosomatic illnesses. Functional GI disorders like functional dyspepsia, gastric dysmotility disorder. There's all kinds of other stuff like chronic fatigue syndrome, reflex sympathetic dystrophy. There's just all kinds of GI stuff, skin stuff. It's whole body kind of stuff. Okay, so there's a ton of diseases that this lecture applies to. And we're going to dive into 3 of them to illustrate those general concepts. Okay? Yes, CRPS, complex regional pain syndrome, 100%. Okay? Hypothyroidism, a little bit less so, but I'm sure there's some thing. Neurodermatitis, absolutely, right? So the other thing is that this is not a substitute for medical treatment. So, and that's, I really mean that. And what I mean is that we're going to teach you all the stuff that medical doctors don't actually know, which is about health promotion and how you can do everything from rewire your brain to re-regulate your nervous system to everything. We're going to tie it all together. But this is all the crap that you need to know that you can do for your illness that is not a medical treatment. Anything we discuss today, I strongly recommend, if you have one of these diagnoses, you really do go to your medical doctor and you talk to them about these concepts. And you kind of you use them or utilize them to help yourself craft a plan about what works for you. Okay? All right. So let's dive in. Is Crohn's partially psychosomatic? Sort of, but it is less psychosomatic than IBS. Okay, and we'll explain how. Okay. Does this imply that it is driven by the mind? Yes and no. This is the problem, is even in that question. So someone's asking, does psychosomatic mean driven by the mind? No. Nothing in you is driven by just one part of you. This is something very important to understand. The psychosomatic illnesses are the ones that are more holistic. And what do I mean by more holistic? This means that there is an interaction between 3, 4, or 5 organ systems. And that interaction is miswired, which means that anyone who targets a particular organ system will not actually lead to a whole lot of healing or recovery, which is why a lot of our pharmacologic medications for psychosomatic illnesses don't do great, right? So we can fix one piece, but there's a whole system problem, and we're going to illustrate that, okay? So let's start with the origins of psychosomatic illness. So what causes a psychosomatic illness? So back in the day, Freud made a observation, and Janet, I think, also made this observation on a psychosomatic illness. And what they essentially discovered is that there appears to be a psychological component to someone's physical manifestations. So Freud was looking specifically at menses and menstruation and really bad like menstrual pain. Janet was looking at other things. But what these two people basically discovered is that people who have a psychosomatic illness bypass a part of their mind. So this is kind of how this works, okay? So they made this observation. Oh my God. Okay. Actually, you know what? Let's actually talk about something else real quick. Okay, so let's finish talking about this before we go to the diagram. All right, so what Freud and Janet basically discovered is that they noticed that as their patients who had really bad somatic manifestations essentially were bypassing a part of their mind. And what they sort of discovered is that the mind is capable of splitting itself in two. And then like the more we bypass our mind, the more somatic problems we tend to have, okay? Now, this has been borne out later in other kinds of research like trauma. So we know, for example, that people who are traumatized early in life, one of the 6 domains of their body, mind, life that is affected is increased somatic complaints. So if you go through a psychological trauma, like even something like emotional abuse, you are more likely to have random problems in your body. So Freud and Janet both sort of discovered this kind of principle. Now, they also made a couple of different ideas behind it. So Freud thought that the nature of the subconscious problem symbolically manifests in the body. So for example, like the kind of psychological thing that happened results in a certain like bodily complaint. So if, for example, I feel like my parents are suffocating me because they don't let me pursue my dreams, then I'll have some kind of like lung complaint and I can't breathe. So that's what Freud thought. I don't really put too much stock into that. But Janet also sort of figured out that like there's some problem with emotional suppression and the increase in our somatic complaints. And what we basically discovered is that alexithymia, which is the inability to determine your internal emotional state, correlates with somatic problems in life. And let's understand how that works. Okay? Okay. So, okay. So here's what happens. Anytime we have a stress, the stress first hits our mind, and then our mind activates in particular ways. So we will release cortisol. We will activate our immune system. We will activate our nervous system. So this is things like adrenaline, right? And then these all will cascade into the body. And we will experience symptoms. So here's what the early like kind of psychoanalysts, and later on we sort of discovered this. If you numb this, so let's say I put this into a black box where I have no awareness, no emotional awareness of what's going on, this basically goes straight into cortisol, whatever, and it kind of gets, it like passes straight through, right? So we're not aware. So the first thing to understand about psychosomatic illness is, in my experience, people with somatic illness do not have a weak mind. They actually have a very strong mind, even to the point that their mind is able to persevere and continue pushing you to the point where your body starts to break down. So if we think about, how does illness emerge in the body? It's basically the weakest link. And when someone's mind is stronger than their body, you can force your body to keep moving forward, even though it is sending you signals. Hey, we're hurting. Hey, this is a problem. Hey, we're getting screwed. And your mind is like so strong that you power through. And when you power through, you actually result in some part of your body starting to get screwed up because your mind is like a taskmaster and it whips forward. Whip, 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 whip. So I became somewhat of an expert in psychosomatic illness. And how did I become an expert in psychosomatic illness? Well, when I was in my 4th year of training at Mass General Hospital and Harvard Medical School, I started a consult service. That was a complementary and alternative medicine, evidence-based consult service. So I started getting patients originally from psychiatrists. But then what happened is primary care physicians or GPs started sending me patients. And they're like, hey, this person has IBS or this other crap that I can't give them a medication and make it go away. So let me send them to you. And then I started doing really well with those patients. I got more and more referrals for like IBS and POTS and fibromyalgia and all this kind of crap. And then as I started working with these people, I started figuring out. So the first thing that I realized is I know what mental illness is, right? I'm a friggin' psychiatrist. And since I know what mental illness is, the first thing that I realized working with IBS patients is these people are not mentally ill. I know what that looks like, right? That even if I treat their anxiety, that I can treat their anxiety and I know I'm doing a good job because there's tons of evidence for it and their symptoms are still continuing. Ergo, this is not something in their mind. And what I actually discovered is that these people are actually very mentally strong. They're not mentally weak. In fact, they are too mentally strong. So what they end up doing is powering through, overcoming some physical signals and are not as emotionally aware as they need to be. Okay? So now let's understand something else. So this is normally how stress happens, right? It goes through our mind, and then it gets passed through our body. And we also know that these people are alexithymic. Psychosomatic illness has an association with trauma. Okay? Some studies show up to 44% of people have been physically or sexually abused. So what's happening in the mind with trauma? These both of these things are going to be similar to dissociation. Okay? So when we don't have awareness in our mind, either from our emotions and being alexithymic or trauma and dissociation, which this means is that the stress just passes through. Now let's look at what happens in a normal situation. Okay? Now, our mind is a really good filtering mechanism. So if I get some kind of stress, someone says, hey, I'm sorry, I can't pick you up from the airport. I got a flat tire. Now, normally, what the mind can do anytime there's a stress is we can modulate that stress. We can use coping mechanisms. We can think things through. We can take a deep breath and we can say, okay, hold on a second. Am I actually as screwed as I think I am? Let me utilize my mind to modulate our stress. And so even if there is a big stress signal coming in, big ass stress signal, I can use my mind to tone it down, and then the stress experienced by my body is smaller. Does this make sense? Y'all get this? So this is normally what happens when you get stressed out, right? If you're in a healthy state of mind, you can modulate the stress that goes into your body. The problem with psychosomatic illness is that this step is taken out. Now, does this mean that the mind controls the illness? No. There's actually all kinds of stuff going on here that is completely legit and real. It is not in your mind. But the problem in psychosomatic illness is that we bypass the mind in some way. There's a part of our mind that keeps on whipping us forward and actually increases the stress on the body. But there's real stress in the body as well. We'll kind of get to that, okay? So the first thing that we've got to do, and we'll get to this later, is we have to sort of fix our mind's ability to modulate the outside stress, which is real, and the physiologic response, which is real. The second thing that we kind of know from people with psychosomatic illness is that they are very externalizing. Now, what does this mean? So if you're struggling with psychosomatic illness and there is a problem, where do problems get fixed? Do they get fixed within you or do they get fixed outside of you? Now, if I ask this question, this is going to be a stupid question for most of y'all, or half of y'all. Half of y'all are going to say, well, obviously, if there's a problem on the outside, the solution is on the outside. This means that you are externalizing. I know it sounds kind of crazy, and what I'm about to say to you is not going to make any sense because the entirety of your experience has taught you that this is not true, which is external problems do not have internal solutions. That needs to change. I know it's crazy, but you're saying, but Dr. K, aren't you saying that there is some real physiology at play? I'm saying, yes, there is real physiology at play, and that solution actually exists within you. I know it sounds weird, but this is what we know. When people grow up in a social situation, sometimes they grow up in a social situation where parents teach them that problems require external solutions. Okay, this is just how you were raised. So when mom and dad had a problem, did they fix it by like doing something external? So there's a good evidence, for example, that shows that when a child has a GI complaint, and some parents take them to the doctor, let's say 10% of the time. Some parents take them to the doctor 50% of the time, and some parents take them to the doctor 90% of the time. This is the category that ends up with children with psychosomatic illness. Now, what does this mean? Does this mean that it's in your head? No. This means that your parents taught you that when you feel bad on the inside, the solution is to go fix something on the outside. GI is gastrointestinal. Okay? So like when a kid says like my tummy hurts. Right? And so like if you think about what a lot of parents will do, a lot of parents will say, well, I know it's the first day of school. I know your tummy hurts. Maybe there's a psychological component to it. There's a physiological component to it as well, by the way. But the way that they manage that is they kind of like emotionally support you. So another thing that we tend to find from a social standpoint is that people who are socially supported have improvements in psychosomatic illness. Okay? Now, people will also reverse engineer to this. They say, well, if you're socially supported, doesn't that mean that it's all in your head? Once again, no. You can have patients with metastatic cancer whose survival rate, I'm sure some study out there will show, I haven't looked at this, like stage 4 cancer and social support. But social support helps people recover from strokes. It helps people recover from myocardial infarctions. It helps people survive cancer. So once again, just because social support is important doesn't mean that it is all in your head. But what we know from people with psychosomatic illness is that when they grow up, they're taught that if I have an internal problem, it requires an external solution. Okay? They also have parents who will be like, if you get frustrated, like if you try to share your emotions with your parents, what do your parents do? Your parents will tell you to do something about it, right? The kids are bullying me at school. Go sign up for martial arts class and kick their ass the next time they bully you. That an internal problem requires an externalizing solution. So what does this mean? But the parent doesn't say, sit down and say, hey, like, I'm sorry they're bullying you. I love you. You're a great person. You'll be okay. Do you want to sign up for martial arts class? Would that help you feel more confident? Do y'all understand how those are two very different things? Like in one case, parents will literally tell you that any problem that you have, if you feel a certain way, you need to change something outside of you. And if you change something outside of you, that will change the way that you feel. Okay? So this is what happens with kids who grow up. They have parents like this that are very externalizing, okay? So this is a core part of psychosomatic illness. So main thing to keep in mind is that our mind has the ability to modulate stress on our body. And that people who grow up with psychosomatic illness are raised in a particular environment where this step is actually removed for them in some kind of way. And this is not just removed from them. This is not just removed from them from just an emotional support standpoint. There are also issues of trauma and dissociation where you are like kind of not, you're literally dissociating. You're fracturing your consciousness into two parts and you're burying one. And the result is that the stress bypasses your mind and goes straight into the body. Okay? Questions about this? Okay. All right. So next thing, we're going to dive. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go into a couple of examples. And as we go through these examples, we're going to illustrate advanced concepts in psychosomatic illness. Okay? So let's talk about IBS. So IBS is irritable bowel syndrome. In irritable bowel syndrome, actually, hold on a second. Let me just take a look at this. Get some water. Okay. So we're going to talk about IBS. All right. So in IBS, which is known as irritable bowel syndrome, what this means is that your bowels are irritable. It's characterized by alternating diarrhea, constipation, nausea, bloating, not too much vomiting usually. Usually it's just like nausea and bloating. But it's really confusing because when we think about it from like a Western medicine standpoint, we know that there's some things that are constipating and some things that cause diarrhea, right? They're absolutely like an infection can cause diarrhea. And if you are hopped up on opiates, you'll get constipated. We'll also know that diet, for example, can cause constipation. But the thing about IBS is that like their GI system is just kind of screwed. Like sometimes they're constipated, sometimes they have diarrhea, they're kind of bloated all the time. And there's not like a medication that we can give that will like fix that, right? We have medications for diarrhea. You can give like loperamide. And we have medications for constipation, right? So you can give people things that are like, will have them poop. And you can even do things like enemas and whatever. You can increase their fiber, increase their fluid intake. But we don't know, like when the bowel is doing both, like we're not sure what medication to give. So what happens in IBS, so this is what IBS is, okay? So it's like just all these weird GI problems that don't have a particular smoking gun. So what do we know about IBS? So first thing that we know is that 15 to 30% of people with IBS have a history of abuse. One study showed that 44% of people have been sexually or physically abused who have IBS. Now let's understand, what is that? Does that mean it's psychological? No, not at all. So what we also know is that people with IBS have a hypersensitivity or an increased amount of adrenaline or noradrenaline. So even if you look at their genetics, these are people that have a hypersensitivity or have too much adrenaline basically in their body. Okay? So what does this mean? How does this fit together? So if you get traumatized early in life, your body rewires. And how does it rewire? So if you get traumatized early in life, when you get traumatized, your body experiences a lot of danger, right? So since it experiences a lot of danger, the danger machinery in your body gets leveled up, right? So if I go and I like lift weights, I'm going to grow my muscles. If I go and like, you know, if I have to memorize a bunch of stuff for medical school, then like my memory capacity will increase. If I get fucking abused, then my sympathetic nervous system, my fight or flight system, my adrenaline system will actually level up, and we will get more sensitive to adrenaline. So there are studies that show that people with IBS have a hyperactive adrenaline and stress system. And so what that means is that things that would normally not stress people out, since you have a hyperactive stress system, normal things will create a disproportionate physiologic response. So we get adrenaline secreted way more often. We get it secreted way earlier. And why is that? It's because we've been hypersensitized, right? Because we grew up in traumatic environments and we're like, for danger, our ability to detect danger increases. Our response to danger increases. Why? Because that's a survival mechanism. But at this point, we've jumped beyond the mind. This has nothing to do with your mind. This has to do with the wiring of your nervous system has altered at this point. And by the way, which psychiatric illness is associated with hyperactivation of our danger circuitry? Can anyone guess? Anxiety. And guess which mental illness is most common in people with IBS? It is anxiety. So these are cases where if we look at what happens in anxiety, you have a hypersensitivity to your stress system. Okay? Now, another thing that we know in people with IBS is that they also have this emotional numbing going on. So how do we put these two pieces together? If my body has been wired to be very sensitive to stress and release way too much adrenaline, and by the way, really what it is reductions in reuptake of adrenaline. So that's not way too much. What that means is that the adrenaline signal lasts way longer in IBS than it does in a healthy person. And this is why they have these like weird kind of symptoms. Okay. So it's not that they like go into panic attacks. It's that their body is in a high stress state for a very long period of time, which can even do things like result in diarrhea. Okay. So you have a hyperactivation of your nervous system. So let's go back to this. So now let's like run through that in a little bit more detail, okay? So what do we know about people with IBS? They have a hyperactivation of sympathetic nervous system. So this is adrenaline and noradrenaline. And specifically what this is a reduction in reuptake of noradrenaline. And what does that mean? Okay, so I know I'm throwing a lot of technical stuff, but I hate to say this, like y'all got to learn this, right? So like stick with us for a while. We're going to reinforce these concepts a couple of times, but it's very important to understand. So this isn't too much adrenaline. What this means is that when we release adrenaline, reuptake is slowed down. So this is our stress experience for someone who has IBS. This is how we're physiologically wired. Okay? So then the other thing that happens is if we have large amounts of adrenaline in our body for prolonged periods of time, what do you think that does to our mind? It makes us more anxious. And then the other thing that it does is it causes us to catastrophize. So this is something that's very important to understand about all psychosomatic illnesses. So when we feel something in our body, and when we learn to externalize, what this ends up as, and if you've got somatic illness, you understand this, you will catastrophize the impact of this. So what that means is I'm starting to feel rumbling in my stomach. This means I need to leave the party because I'm about to get fucked. The rumbling in the stomach means I'm GG'd out. And why do they do this? What's going on here? There's all kinds of really interesting things. So when we have adrenaline in the brain, one function of adrenaline in the brain is that it makes hypothetical problems feel more real. Okay, now let's understand this for a second. If I'm walking in my house and I see, I don't know, a fucking garden hose in my laundry room, and I don't see it very clearly, and adrenaline is pumping, I'm going to see a garden hose and I'm going to think it is a snake. That possibility of danger feels more real. And I jump and I scream. And I go jump into my wife's arms and she holds me and pats me and comforts me. Right? So what adrenaline literally does in the brain is it makes possible things feel more real. Okay? So now let's if we have adrenaline in the brain, which by the way, we know that genetically people with IBS have more adrenaline floating around all over the place. We'll get to why their adrenaline is even higher for other reasons in a minute. And then that adrenaline goes to our body. What does that mean? That causes us to catastrophize. Okay? As we catastrophize, and there's also some good data for this, right? So internally, like I had a patient once that had IBS that literally like shat themselves on their honeymoon. And like, that's not a psychological cry for attention or any of that other crap. Doesn't mean that they're mentally weak or whatever. They're like, yay, I'm getting married. This is going to be great. And I shat myself. And now this is embarrassing. And I'm married to this person. And like what they like help their spouse help clean themselves up. Like you cannot tell me that this is some fucking psychological cry for help or attention or whatever. right? So I worked with this person. I'm like, that's not what's going on. It's just not what's going on, okay? So what happens with people with IBS is that they have genuine bad outcomes plus this adrenaline thing, which causes them to catastrophize. As they catastrophize, they start doing something called behavioral amplification, which is the second I feel something in my body, I'm going to alter my behavior. So the second I feel a rumbling, I'm going to leave dinner. The second I feel a rumbling, I'm going to walk out of the movie theater because bad things can happen. Okay? So this is a psychological consequence. This, in turn, leads to social isolation. And then it all kind of fits back together and it becomes a clusterfuck. So there's also a couple of other things that we know in IBS. So this is hyperactivation. This is number one. Y'all with me? Or is that like two all over the place? Give up time. Well said. Second thing that happens in IBS is that we have changes to our immune system. Okay? So we get an increase in enterochromaffin activity. We also see increased mast cell activity. So what this basically means is like our allergy response, like the part of our immune system that governs allergies is basically hyperactive. So we basically have like our gut has an allergic response. And that's why we get like diarrhea and bloating and all this like non-specific stuff. It's not that we have an infection that can be localized to one area. It's not like there's one part of our, gut that's messed up. We don't have like a loose gastroesophageal sphincter, which causes reflux. There's not one problem. Our whole gut is like hypersensitive due to a couple of these changes, which means that like it's easy to trigger it into like going down a cascade of crap. Okay? Third thing is that there is a brain-gut connection. There's like way more than 3. There's like 15, but we're going to explain a couple of the others later, okay? I'm going to spoon feed y'all. So what we know is that gut microbiome and this allergic GI system causes immune activation. Okay? And then the other thing that starts to happen is that we also see changes from this kind of stuff in visceral sensory input. Okay? So now what does this mean? So we have nerves in our belly that tell us stuff about our belly. This is when we like, when you feel full after eating a lot, like what's going on there? You've got a nerve that detects the stretch of like your stomach. You have all kinds of nerves down there. And what we see in people with IBS is that there is a hypersensitivity to visceral sensory input. So there is like, let's say here's your stomach. And after I eat whatever I'm going to have for lunch, this is my stomach. If I'm a healthy human being, this wide stomach makes me feel content. Oh man, I'm going to unbutton that top button. I'm going to slap my belly. I'm going to eat one more piece of pie. I'm going to squeeze in that pie. Man, that's some good eating. Let me tell you what. That is some good eating. Delicious. Give me some of that peach cobbler with a scoop of that a la mode vanilla ice cream. I can do one more. This makes us feel good. If you have a hypersensitivity to visceral sensory input, then this feels bad. Oh, crap. I'ma throw up. Oh, crap. Oh, my God. I ate too much. Something's wrong. Something's wrong. I'm going to throw up. Oh, shit. This feels so bad. Like, oh, my God. Something's not right. This feels bad. So the way that your nerves are wired feels bad. Now, why are your nerves wired in this different way? Now we're going to go back to the way that you grew up. Okay? So, if you had a parent who had GI problems, they were like constantly like talking about their own stomach, my stomach is messed up or whatever. Maybe there was some psychological need, right? When your stomach If you have a parent with GI problems and you complain, my stomach hurts, and your parent takes that very seriously. It's not about just psychological needs reinforcement. It's like your parent is like, okay, so tell me, does it hurt? Is it bloated? Are you nauseous? Do you feel distended? Is it irritable? And so then they hyper focus on that. And just like any parent will teach their child what they know, this is what happens. Right? So if I like to meditate, and I'm a psychiatrist. So when my kids tell me that they're not feeling well, I ask them all kinds of questions about it. And I'm sort of leveling up their awareness about emotions. And if I ask all kinds of physical questions, then the kid is like, if I ask a 6-year-old, do you feel distended or bloated? Do you feel nauseous? Do you feel gassy? Do you have this problem? Do you have this problem? Literally what that's going to do is that 6-year-old brain the attention is going to go into the gut. And their visceral sensory afferent nerves, which is the stuff that detects stuff in the gut, is going to become hypersensitive. This is the same way that, if I teach a child how to cook, their palate is going to be sensitive, right? Same thing is going on in the gut. So what we know with kids with IBS is that their visceral internal input has become hypersensitive. This is because of the way that their parents treat them. This is because they do have some kind of real GI problem. This can also be because there's some kind of behavioral reinforcement where the only time my parents love me is when I my parents ignore me. They're working really hard unless I get sick. And if I get sick, I get my parents' attention. Now, some people will interpret that as, that means that they're doing it for attention. What I'm saying is that that's just one piece of the puzzle. But at the end of the day, what ends up happening is our visceral sensory input increases. And when our visceral sensory input increases, it changes the way that we experience ordinary things. Ordinary things become unpleasant. Okay? Now, combine that with active immune system and an allergic GI tract, and there's more crap going on. The more crap there is going on, if I amplify the signal, the worse everything gets. Y'all with me? How all this stuff fits together? There isn't it's not a linear problem. It's like a system problem. And if y'all are curious about, what is the system? This is the system. Look at this. What the fuck? This is literally how it works. People have mapped this out. This is not in your head. This is not psychological. There is a GI-specific anxiety. Absolutely. There's a personality component, but there's an attentional component. There is interoceptive conditioning. There's GI immune function, mechanoreceptors, afferent nerves, mechanical GI stimulation. There are hormones that are acting here. This is literally what we know. It is not in your head. Okay? So what I'm going to try to do is we're going to explain all this crap. So strap in, folks. We're just getting started. Okay? Y'all with me so far? Do you have any insight into idiopathic postprandial syndrome? No. But by the end of this lecture, you will. Okay? I know it sounds kind of weird. All right. So this is IBS. All right. So what happens in IBS? Let's summarize. Something goes on early in life that primes our adrenaline and sympathetic nervous system. Something goes on in life that increases our sensory awareness of the GI system. That, combined with stuff like catastrophizing from too much noradrenaline and bad things actually happening, results in we get too much signal, and we amplify the danger of the signal, and we get screwed every time anything happens. So what does this mean? This means that an IBS person can sit in some posture that makes their stomach feel slightly uncomfortable. And whereas a normal person would just shift and they'd be fine, the IBS person has all of this experience and their brain is functioning in a particular way to where this thing is not a benign problem. This ain't just going to go away. It's going to screw the rest of my day. Okay, that's IBS. Next thing we're going to talk about, POTS. So, before we get into the diagrams for POTS, we got to talk about POTS, okay? So let's understand how blood pressure works. Got to understand blood pressure. So, when I'm laying down, I have about 300 to 800 milliliters of blood in my thorax, in my central chest, right? So when I'm laying down, there's no gravitational effect, and blood actually pools in my chest and abdomen. When I sit up, gravity has an effect on blood, pulls towards the bottom. Then what happens is my body squeezes my blood vessels, especially at the bottom of my feet. So when I clamp down, right? So imagine that I have a tube, okay? Imagine I have a tube of liquid. If I clamp down at the bottom of the tube, okay, so here's our body when we're laying flat. Here's blood equally distributed. Then when I sit up, here's my blood vessel. So what happens? Gravity makes it pool over here. How do I get the blood to move up? I clamp down this way, right? So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a tube like this. And if I make a tube like this, what's going to happen with the blood? It's going to go up. With me? So there's another thing. So anytime we sit up or stand up, okay, we'll talk about, well, POTS is postural orthostatic tachycardic syndrome. We'll talk about that in a second, all right? So you all have to understand this. The other thing that happens is notice that what I did here, I didn't just compress this, I also dilated this. So this is wider than this. And this is narrower than this. That's exactly what we want. So normally, when we sit up, the blood flow to our brain, we get dilation of the blood vessels that go into our brain. And we get constriction of the blood vessels at the bottom of our feet. And so what that means is that we're decreasing the resistance up here. Hey, blood, come on up to the head, bro. Come on, girl, like come up to the head and like give us cerebral blood flow so that we don't fucking pass out. And y'all feet, now that y'all have gravity working for you, y'all don't need as much blood, so we're going to constrict the blood vessels. Okay? This is the homeostasis that we sort of get with blood pressure. Now, what happens in POTS? In POTS, when people stand up, their blood pressure drops and they become tachycardic. So what happens is that when this happens with people with POTS, this does not actually happen. Instead, the blood vessels stay like this. And when the blood vessels stay like this, our brain, which is over here, is like, yo, I ain't getting no blood. I ain't getting no blood. So then that goes over to our heart, and our heart is like, oh crap, our brain ain't getting no blood. I'm going to start, that's a lightning bolt. I'm going to start beating really fast. So now I'm going to beat at 130 beats per minute. Okay? Why? Why am I beating at 130 beats per minute? Because if I ain't getting no blood, I got to start pumping, right? The heart's got to pump because that's what maintains your vascular pressure is your heart. If your heart starts pumping, the pressure in your system basically drops to zero. I mean, that's not technically correct because there's fluid in there, but it's basically what maintains blood pressure, right? So this is what happens in POTS. People stand up and they feel dizzy. So what causes this? So the first thing that I want to point out to y'all. So here is the symptoms associated with POTS and the relative frequency in 152 patients. Now, y'all may be asking yourselves, but Dr. K, you're talking about this is very physiologic. Like there's no mind stuff here, right? So holy crap, POTS is associated with nausea in 38% of people. What the hell does that have to do with blood pressure? Diarrhea in 17% of people, fatigue in 48% of people, sleep disturbance in 31% of people, weakness, right? Like low MMR in 50% of people. Holy crap. Bronze rank in 50% of people. Palpitations, like that makes sense. That's heart stuff. Lightheadedness, dizziness, chest pain. I also wonder, does this look like symptoms of anxiety? Interesting, right? But if we look at evidence-based treatment, water and salt, fludrocortisone, exercise, midodrine, beta blockers, octreotide, erythropoietin, central sympatholytic agents, right? So if we look at like treatments for POTS, like no one is like, what? But what about all this crap? What are we doing about this? What is the doctor going to do about this? And this is why patients have such frustrating experiences with doctors. Because when you get POTS, they send you a cardiologist, and cardiologist is like, great. I'm not trying to crap on cardiologists here. It's not their fault. They're like, I'm going to give you midodrine and fludrocortisone. Right? Because that's what cardiologists, I'm going to give you a beta blocker. I'm going to give you octreotide. But like, they don't know anything about processing trauma. So what's up with that? So let's talk about trauma and stuff. You guys with me? So this is, first we have to understand how POTS works. That's basic understanding of POTS. All right. Now we're going to go into more details. We're going to go back to this. We're filling this out. Okay. All right. So let's understand a couple of things. So if we look at, and by the way, POTS also has a comorbidity with chronic fatigue syndrome of 48%. All right. So that's kind of interesting. Like, what does chronic fatigue have to do with this stuff? So let's understand a couple of things about impaired blood flow. So what we know in POTS is that there is a paradoxical vasoconstriction. I know I'm tossing terms at you. We're going to explain it, okay? Of cerebral blood flow. Now, what does that mean? This is the normal situation. When we stand up, this is what we want, right? So here's normal. Here's what we want. And what happens in POTS? This. Right? So this is where the blood flow is normally. When we sit up, we get this. And what happens in people with POTS? This. So paradoxical. Why do we call it a paradox? Because it's the opposite of what's supposed to happen. Vasoconstriction. So this is vasoconstriction. We are constricting the blood vessel towards the brain. So when their brain should be getting blood, they don't get blood. In fact, they get even less blood. And now we see why presyncope means almost passing out is 60% of people. They're right before passing out. They also pass out, by the way. But like 60% of people regularly almost pass out or feel lightheaded or dizzy because there's no blood flow. Now you may say, but Dr. K, what the F does this have to do with the mind? So what causes this paradoxical vasoconstriction? What do we know about people with POTS? Is they have a dysregulation of their sympathetic nervous system. And this is adrenaline and noradrenaline. And have we heard of that before, chat? Huh. That's interesting. So even GI stuff that is completely unrelated, we will see in all of these psychosomatic illnesses are going to have changes. Where is this? Where did I put this somewhere, right? Yeah. They're going to have a hyperactivation of the sympathetic, a problem with reuptake of noradrenaline in IBS. And we get a problem with our sympathetic nervous system in POTS, which is responsible for a lot of that crap. So that's interesting, Dr. K. You're telling me that dysregulation of the sympathetic nervous system is responsible for IBS, and this is a problem in POTS. If that were true, then that would mean that someone with POTS may have problems with their GI tract. Holy crap! 40% of people with POTS have problems with their GI tract. I wonder if there is a common mechanism. Yes. Yes, there is. Oh, that's fucking weird. It's almost like POTS is not a cardiovascular problem and actually relates to GI issues, and IBS may not be a GI issue and may relate to your cardiovascular system. It's almost as if the body is connected. Yes, that is precisely correct. Okay? Now, what else do we have with POTS? We have abnormal visceral sensory input. So people with POTS are hypersensitive, not to their GI tract, although they may do that too because they experience bloating and all that crap. They are hypersensitive to the signals from their heart. So think about it this way. The neurons that connect to the heart have the volume jacked all the way up. So even a tiny little signal gets amplified in our brain. And we're going to get to this more with fibromyalgia in a second. Okay? So, now here's a question for you. So there's also one other thing. So this paradoxical vasoconstriction is caused by hypocapnia, low CO2. Okay, now we're going to get kind of crazy and we're going to get into a really interesting detail. So when we've got a blood vessel, what determines whether it dilates or what determines whether it constricts? Actually, I want to redo that. Let me do this. Okay, so here's our blood vessel. This is a dilated blood vessel. This is a constricted blood vessel. When we have high CO2 or low O2, our blood vessels will expand, right? Because we're not getting enough blood. What does blood do? It carries oxygen and it gets rid of CO2. So when we've got high CO2, i.e., and low oxygen, that's when our blood vessels are like, hey, let's dilate. We need more blood. When we have low CO2 or high O2, then our blood vessels constrict. So this is our body's way of, so I'll give you all just a simple example of this, okay? So let's say I'm running. Now, what happens to my blood vessels when I'm running? It's not uniform. So my GI system is like, or our skeletal muscles are doing a lot of activity. My legs are pounding. As my legs contract, as the muscles in my legs contract, they're doing work, right? So they're consuming a lot of oxygen. So the O2 level by the legs drops. As the O2 level by the legs drops, our blood vessels expand near the legs. So that's how we get more blood flow to the legs, right? Get the heart pumping. Now, what's happening in your GI system when you go running? GI system ain't doing crap. It's not digesting anything. So it's like, hey, like the skeletal muscle is like, hey, we need a bunch of oxygen. We need more blood. Our GI system is like, we're running on an empty stomach. We're not digesting anything. We don't need any blood. So they constrict. Now, what happens in POTS is a paradoxical vasoconstriction. So even though the tissue in the blood, in the brain, doesn't have enough oxygen, right? We're not getting enough blood. For some reason, there's vasoconstriction. And so what we know in people with POTS is that if you can induce hypercapnia, if you can increase CO2 levels, it will actually fix this screwed up vasoconstriction in your brain. So this is normally, so now let's go back to POTS. I know I'm kind of losing y'all. It'll come together, I promise. Okay? So this is what happens normally, but in POTS, there's a paradoxical response where this signal, oh, sorry. Okay, so do y'all make sense? Oh, let me think about this. They're hypocapnic. Oh, no. So this is not paradoxical. This is functioning properly. So people with POTS are hypocapnic, which means that there's some kind of weird paradoxical hypocapnia, which causes vasoconstriction. So one of the treatments for POTS, I know this sounds kind of weird, is actually to increase your CO2 level. Okay? Because remember, when we increase our CO2 level, what happens? We vasodilate. What do we want to blood? What do we want for blood flow in the brain? We want to vasodilate our blood to the brain. We want to go from here to here. And what is the signal that goes from this to this? It is increased CO2. I know I kind of stumbled through that. Do y'all get me? Y'all with me now? So when CO2 increases, we're going to vasodilate. Okay? Now, if only there was a practice that we could do that would induce high levels of CO2. Do y'all know of any such practice? Which is weird, right? Because we don't usually think about it as high levels of CO2. Making out actually works. Yes, I'm sure that would work. Meditation. Yes, 100%, right? So we're going to get to that in a second when we talk about how to fix this stuff and why people kept on coming to me to fix their psychosomatic illnesses. Okay? So in POTS, we've got basically all the same stuff, right? So we've got abnormal sensory processing. We've got hyperactivation of the sympathetic nervous system. And there's some weird specific physiologic stuff that we're tunneling way down into, okay? Common things and specific things. Now let's talk about fibromyalgia. Okay. So when we talk about fibromyalgia, we got to understand how nerves work. This is really important to understand for psychosomatic illness, okay? So, y'all ever heard of phantom limb? So phantom limb is when someone has an amputation. And for the limb that has been amputated, they still feel pain in the amputated limb, even though there's no nerve there to feel pain. And this is a problem, right? Because I am a medical doctor and I can give someone some kind of treatment to provide analgesia to the pain. Analgesia means the removing pain, okay? So I can give you a medicine to dull the nerves. Or I can give you something like lidocaine. So lidocaine numbs nerves. It shuts off nerves. And if I give you lidocaine, then you won't feel any pain because I've shut off the nerve. But how on earth, as a doctor, what do I do if there's no nerve to begin with and you're feeling pain? It's like, wait, what? How do what's going on there? So let's understand. Here's my hand. Okay? My hand has receptors. So I want y'all to do this with me. Poke yourself. When you poke yourself, you feel something, right? So when you feel this, what's happening is there's a nerve over here that's detecting that. That nerve travels all the way up your arm and enters into the side of your spinal cord, joins with a bunch of other nerves. So there's a new nerve over here. So I'm going to send a signal over here. And then I transmit that signal to a nerve over here. A second connected nerve, but it's a different nerve, goes into my brain, makes a second connection, and then travels to another part of my brain. And then in that third nerve is where I experience pain. Okay? The subjective experience of pain doesn't come from your hand. It comes from your brain. So we're going to illustrate this. Okay, so here's nerve number 1, nerve number 2, and nerve number 3. So if I get a signal that travels down here and then activates over here and travels down here and activates over here, then I feel pain. Now, when we have phantom limb, there's nothing over here. But what can sometimes happen is this can get stuck in the on position. And if this gets stuck in the on position, or this gets stuck in the on position, then we will subjectively feel pain because our switch up here is stuck on, even though it's not coming from anywhere. Does that make sense? It can get stuck on. So even if you look at things like tinnitus or tinnitus, what happens in tinnitus? We are hearing something, but there's no noise. So normally when we hear things, there's auditory nerve number 1, auditory nerve number 2, and auditory nerve number 3. But there's no sound. So this thing isn't activating, but this guy over here in tinnitus, this is probably what it is, somehow still screws up and turns on. So what is fibromyalgia? Fibromyalgia is something over here where we're not quite sure, but there's a part of it that's peripheral and there's a part of it that's central. So in fibromyalgia, people feel pain all over the place. Okay? So some of that is coming from some of that is coming from the peripheral nerve. Some of it is actually coming from my hands, but some of it is also coming from my brain. So there is a abnormal signal and central processing. Now, what are some of the things that contribute to this? So we know that people with fibromyalgia oftentimes have some low level of inflammatory activity. Now, what is inflammation? Do y'all know what the relationship between inflammation and pain is? So inflammation makes our pain receptors hypersensitive. Okay? That's what inflammation does. That's why, and why does this do this? Let's understand this from an evolutionary standpoint real quick. So when I have an injury, I don't want to re-traumatize the injury, right? Like if I have a broken bone, I don't want to screw up the healing of the bone. So evolutionarily, what am I going to do? I'm going to send signals to my brain, hey, don't touch this. And anytime, even a light touch on a broken bone will hurt a lot. And that's adaptive, because if any touch hurts, then I'm not going to move it. And if I don't move it, then it has a better chance to heal properly. Whereas if I've got a cut on my hand and I keep on, if I have no pain signals, then like that cut is going to keep getting infected and I'm going to like use it and it's going to open up more. It's going to be more damaging. So it is adaptive for inflammation to increase pain. In fibromyalgia, there's some level of inflammation that is like low grade going on in the body. And by the way, what are some of the things that contribute to whole body inflammation? Gut microbiome. Okay, so what contributes to whole body inflammation? Our allergic load, right? So if we've got hypersensitive things like mast cells and crap like that, that's going to increase inflammation. What are allergies? Allergies are inappropriate activation of immune system. And I don't know if y'all know this, but inflammation is caused by the immune system. The two are basically interchangeable. Inflammation is the activity of the immune system. And gut microbiome is one of the biggest sources of like kind of whole body, low level inflammation. There are even studies that show that low level inflammation in the brain leads to mood disorders. Okay? So we were really, really excited about this. And we were like, oh, inflammation leads to mood disorders, so let's give people who are depressed anti-inflammatory medications. But it doesn't really help much, unfortunately. And this is, hopefully y'all understand why, because you can't just target one part of this. Do y'all get this? It's all friggin' connected. And it's not like there's one problem. Okay? So in the case of fibromyalgia, we have abnormal nervous input. We have low-level inflammation. There are even studies that show that gut-brain interventions will be helpful for fibromyalgia. So let's go to... So here's just a better graphical representation than me. So here's the trauma. Here's the peripheral nerve. Travels to the spinal cord. Has ascending input into the brain. And then we have a transmission of pain signal into the brain. Okay? Let me see if this review has treatments. Okay, so okay, well, we're not going to get into this. I'm getting distracted. Forget about this. Okay, so this is fibromyalgia. Now, I'm going to pause for a second and ask y'all, what questions do y'all have about what we've covered so far? So next up is like what the hell to do about it, and we're going to pull it all together. But before we do that, I want to make sure that y'all, I want to make sure that y'all have a chance to ask questions. Why do doctors not learn this? We'll talk about that in a second. We're going to summarize. Can these issues be congenital? Okay. Do I just send this VOD to a lot of sure, send it to all your friends. Why not? That's why we're making it. Okay, okay, confounders, okay. This experimenting, okay, we're going to answer all these. How do I not have all these disorders? We're going to answer all that. Okay, good. Thank you guys very much for your questions. So now let's pull it together. Okay, so the first question that people ask, so now we're going to pull it together. Y'all ready? Bringing it all together, as well as like how I approach patients who have this problem. So the first thing to understand about Western medicine is that Western medicine is based on linear idiopathogenic principles. What does that mean? Linear, A leads to B. Idiopathogenic, the source of the problem is linear. So in Western medicine, what causes a heart attack? It implies that there's this thing called a heart attack, and it has a cause. So what causes a heart attack is the basically absolute occlusion of a coronary artery. This is the problem that causes this thing. What causes COVID? A virus causes COVID, right? What causes depression? Major depressive disorder is caused by a serotonin deficiency. Now, that's not necessarily true, but my point is if you look at Western medicine, it is like A leads to B, which is how our system of science works. So in science, what we try to do in medicine, we do these things called randomized controlled trials, which is we're going to remove all of the other factors, and we are going to try to isolate the relationship between A and Z. This is literally how we build our scientific infrastructure. So the more complicated it is, we try to actually remove all of that crap. And so what we've done in Western medicine is get really, really good at treating things where an A leads to a Z. We get really, really good at the treatment of a specific diagnosis. And that's how our system of medicine is structured. You get a diagnosis, and you go to the expert that deals with that diagnosis. Now, this creates all kinds of problems. One of my favorite quotes from an anime is, "Over-specialize and breed in weakness," from Ghost in the Shell. And so now, for example, we know that gut health is very important for mood disorders. We know that there's some kind of gut bacteria that endogenously produce serotonin. And when people have a mood disorder, those kinds of gut bacteria are low in number. So we have the wrong gut bacteria to produce serotonin. So we have an endogenous serotonin deficiency. If we send you to a psychologist who has had a total of 0 hours of training on anything related to the gut, they are not going to be able to help you with that. We can send you to a psychiatrist. We know some of the stuff, right? So one of the reasons that we're decent is we know some of the medical stuff, but even in our system of psychiatry, we don't really apply it. If we send you to a cardiologist, they're going to know the cardiac stuff, but they're not going to know about trauma. But trauma and POTS are related. And this has to do with our lineo-idiopathogenic perspective in medicine. One thing causes one problem. As our system of medicine has evolved, we have started to discover other things. So cardiac disease, sure, is what causes a heart attack is a clogged artery. But what we also know is that your cholesterol level over the course of your lifespan will lead to occlusion of the artery. That this thing matters more, and this thing matters more, and this thing matters more, right? So then what happens in our Western system of medicine, okay? So here is a heart attack caused by a occlusion of a coronary artery. And then what are the risk factors that lead to coronary occlusion? Cholesterol, inflammation. Okay, well, what determines cholesterol? Exercise, diet, genetics. Okay, what leads to inflammation? Everything. Diet, genetics, gut microbiome. Y'all with me? And so Western medicine is just an absolute beast for some things. Like cystic fibrosis. Man, this is friggin' amazing. Cystic fibrosis is caused by a single gene mutation. There ain't risk factors and stuff. If you've got 2 copies of the recessive gene, you're screwed. And so if we replace this gene, the cystic fibrosis goes away. There are some kinds of cancer, like CML, for example. I think this is right? We sort of figured out like an antibody. We figured out one thing where we can like basically, is it CML? I feel like I'm blanking here. But there's all kinds of stuff. There's like HER2 new positive cancers and HER2 new negative cancers. And then we're really good at stuff like microbiology and infectious disease. We like crush all of the systems of medicine when it comes to this. You've got a bug in you. The bug causes a problem. We're going to give you an antibiotic that's going to kill the bug, and the problem will literally disappear. You will be cured. We can, hopefully soon, we can cure cystic fibrosis. There's some diseases in medicine that we can cure. Which of the diseases we can cure? The ones that have a linear idiopathogenesis. We can't cure all of them, but we sort of figure it out. Now, the more that a disease moves away from this concept, the worse we get at Western medicine. If you have IBS, your PCP is going to send you to a cardiologist or GI doctor and a psychotherapist, and they're going to each act independently. Okay? But there's no uniform thing. And why isn't there a uniform thing? Because there's so much crap to learn over here. Right? Like, do y'all understand that, like, people are asking, like, why don't doctors learn this stuff? The first is that we're learning more about it now, so it'll go into the curriculum, I think, in the next 20, 30, 40 years. It's happening already. The second thing is we just have tons to learn. Like, we know so much about the body, it's like crazy. And this is why you as a patient have to learn this. Because your doctor's not going to, it's not going to enter your doctor's curriculum in time for it to help you. So you have to learn it. Okay? Now, how do we fix this? So first thing is, seriously, talk to your doctor. But let's understand this. So there are genetic factors. There are social factors. There are upbringing factors. Okay? There are mental factors. There are inflammation factors. There are physiologic reprogramming. Okay? Nervous system reprogramming. There's brain gut. So when I literally have a patient with psychosomatic illness, this is what I do with them, okay? So the first thing is we know that there's some genetic predispositions. What do we do about it? Nothing. Can't really do much about it, right? So I don't do gene therapy in my office. But for you to understand that part of this is genetic, but then you may say, but Dr. K, like, then what's the point of talking about it? So this is why I talk to my patients about karma. We'll get to this later, all right? But to understand that as a human being, there is a narrative and a reason for you being the way that you are. And there's a therapeutic modality to kind of like talk to people about this stuff. And when I talk to my patients about their karma, it helps them make sense of their life. It gives them a sense of narrative. So karma leads to narrative. And narrative heals trauma. This is scientific. This is not. Second thing, social factors. So there's a couple of things that we have to keep in mind. The first is, I know it's kind of weird, but what is your relationship with illness? and this may sound kind of weird because how is that like a social factor? Like, I don't know how else to put this, but when you were raised, it helps to understand how you were socialized. So like, if your stomach hurts, what did you learn about life? How did other people treat you? What was reinforced and not reinforced? Because what's happening is that oftentimes the wrong things are reinforced in our upbringing, and then we propagate those things. So one example of this is overvalued ideas and catastrophizing. So what this means is that, and there's also like social consequences. So if my stomach rumbles, that means that I'm screwed. That means that I can't have fun today. That means that I need to leave, which then leads to social isolation. So all this crap is like you have to unpack, right? Because because you have to understand that your body has visceral afferents that are hypersensitive, which means that you may technically be completely fine. But the way that you were wired is to amplify a normal signal into the danger zone. And then you have behaviors once you enter the danger zone. So this is something that I also have to help people with who are like actively psychotic. When you're actively psychotic and there is a devil trying to break down your door, you are getting a danger signal that leads to a behavior. Since the devil is trying to break down the door, I better jump out the window. Problem is, you're on a 3rd story of a building. And I literally had a patient who did that, broke both of their legs. So part of my treatment for this patient is the signals that you are receiving. There needs to be space between the signals that you receive and what you do. Okay? This goes back to this. Where do we create that space? This is where we create that space. Between the stressor and the response, there needs to be space. Okay? So if you're someone who struggles with psychosomatic illness, and this is what CBT does as well. So if we look at this is going to be CBT. CBT will teach you, train you to create a space between your visceral afferent information and your behaviors and all this kind of stuff in the middle. So the other thing that we need to do, and this is all, okay, so upbringing factors. So this is where, this is where we kind of think about parental reinforcement. When you were sick, what did it do for various parts of your life? Right? You need to think about that. Did it give you, were you excused from duties? And if that's the case, then some part of your mind is going to have figured that out, right? And then what's going to happen is when you feel stressed and things are overwhelming and you wish stuff would go away, you will get sick. Now, why are you getting sick? Are you trying to get out of responsibility? A part of you is, but that doesn't mean that what you feel is not real. Right? That also means that when you're stressed, your cortisol levels are going to increase. The inflammation is going to increase. We're going to see noradrenaline dumping into your system, and it's going to physiologically create all these problems as well. It is neither either or. It is psychosomatic. And this is what we know. So people who have psychogenic seizures, which are like fake seizures, 50% of them or more have real seizures as well. So our mind is going to learn to use whatever fucking tools it has at its disposal. And that can include your own illness, your very real physiologic illness, to get excuses from stress. Because your mind, it's not even getting an excuse. That's the wrong way. It's a way to remove stress. Our brain is like, hey, we've got too much stress. We can play this card and it'll make the stress go away. We're going to play that card because it's too overwhelming. Psychotherapy can help with that. Other things to consider. Okay? I'm going to have to move some of these down. Trauma. So when we get traumatized, we become alexithymic. We dissociate. And then we have a problem because we've got a stressor, which, by the way, is a amplified visceral afferent, right? We've got a hypersensitive nerve, which then travels to our brain and then is perceived by our mind and then induces physiologic changes. Increased adrenaline. Increased cortisol. And by the way, I don't know if y'all know this, but cortisol increases inflammation. And as we've learned, what do these things do? We have visceral afferent hypersensitivity. So our tissues react to that. Our heart starts pumping faster. Inflammation in the gut, right? So remember that IBS is caused by allergy of the gut, hyperactivation of inflammation. So when we get inflammation in the gut, our gut starts to feel weird. We get inflammation, increases visceral afferent. We stress ourselves out, goes back to the brain. It's a cycle. Now remember, this goes back to Freud, so we got to thank the dude for a couple of things. One of the things that he discovered is that once we make the unconscious conscious, we can act upon it. So as we become less alexithymic, so right now what's going on is that this is just passing straight through. But once we raise awareness of this, we can utilize our mind to dampen the signal. So as you become emotionally aware, literally that stress does not pass straight through to your physiology. This is why psychotherapy helps with psychosomatic illness. It is not that, hopefully I've convinced y'all at this point. The problem is all of this. Why does psychotherapy works? It's because we can interrupt the cycle in one place. But psychotherapy does not cure psychosomatic illness. It just helps because we're utilizing this. And someone else, like let's say a cardiologist may give you something to reduce the effect of adrenaline, like a beta blocker. Okay? So we can intervene at every one of these places. And it just happens that psychotherapy is one of them. The problem is that our physiologic understanding of all of this stuff sucks. And so our medical doctors are not able to intervene in these global holistic ways. And so since this sucks, we don't have a good treatment for it, which is why they get sent to a psychologist, and a psychologist can consistently help these people. Therefore, we conclude it is psychological in nature. It is not psychological in nature. But your mind is a tool that you can use to modulate the signals between your stressors and your responses. Do we understand this? Is psychosomatic the same as autoimmune? It's really freaking close, but it is not the same. Okay. What the hell is this? How do I get rid of this? I don't even know. What is this? Oh, God. Okay, great. Next up, reducing inflammation, right? So anti-inflammatory diet. Okay. So actually, we're going to move that. I'll talk about this at the end. Let's talk about inflammation and gut together. Now we're going to teach you some cool stuff. The other thing that we've got to do is reprogram our physiology and nervous system. How are we going to do this? Mind-body practices. Things like meditation and especially yoga. So we got to talk about this. Super cool. So if we look at alternative medicine, actually we'll talk about alternative medicine in a second. So how do you reprogram your brain, your physiology, and your nervous system? Yoga and Tai Chi are like the best. So let's understand this. So in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, which is sort of like the seminal text on yoga, the Bible of yoga, call it whatever you want. When he talks about yoga postures or yoga asana, he doesn't write like a whole book, right? There are whole books on yoga postures. Like, can I find it on my shelf? Yes. Dr. K actually organized this bookshelf. You have books like the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, which is a text on yoga. It's all about the different postures, all the different asanas that you've got, right? Let's see if there's pictures. There's like this kind of crap where this dude is candle gazing. There's this kind of crap where there's like dude pouring water in his nose. There's like this kind of crap, this posture. find another picture. Oh my God, pictures. There's this kind of crap, right? This is Hatha Yoga Pradipika. All of these are asanas. But all of these things come from Patanjali saying that there are two things that make a yoga asana, yoga posture. It should be stable and it should bring your awareness to the present. So when you do yoga, what's literally happening in your brain? And the original research that I did was in a somatosensory, in a neuroscience lab studying the somatosensory cortex on Tai Chi at Harvard. And what we basically discovered is that when you do yoga, you enter this human pretzel. Why do you turn in this human pretzel? It's not about flexibility. Everyone's like, oh, I want to do yoga for flexibility. That's not why anyone does. I mean, that's why it's stupid. Not stupid. That's judgmental. That's not what yoga is designed for. The purpose of yoga is to bring your sensory awareness to your body in the present. So the reason that I do this for a long time, why do we hold postures, is that the longer you hold a posture, and if you get that right kind of stretch, your attention goes to a particular part of your body. So literally, what are you remapping? This visceral sensory afferent, right? This is the term that we use. The nerves that detect things in your gut or in your heart that are hypersensitized. When we do yoga and Tai Chi, we recalibrate those. Because what are you literally doing with your brain? What you're doing with your brain is focusing your attention on a particular thing away from a particular thing. You're literally, and this is what we sort of found in our lab, was you are remapping like that part of your brain, the somatosensory afferent part. It looks like I have something going on there, whatever. All right, I'm activated. I had coffee on an empty stomach today. That's probably why I have this going on. Hypersensitivity, skin reaction. Y'all are seeing it happen live because of my diet. It's funny. So yoga and Tai Chi, what they're going to do is sort of recalibrate that sort of like sensory mapping, okay? And what I've sort of found when I have patients that consistently do yoga, their relationship to their body changes. And something just weird happens with your somatosensory cortex. It kind of rewires. And that signal of like afferent nerve into the brain changes. So the lab that I was in was studying chronic pain and Tai Chi. And what we sort of discovered was this thing that in chronic pain, our brain is sort of locked into pain in a particular way. And that Tai Chi actually like increases neuroplasticity in that part of our brain and reduces the chronic pain via neuroplasticity. So this is why if you look at studies on yoga and Tai Chi, they're superior to exercise when it comes to some of these things in terms of outcomes. The question is why? Because it's not just about pumping your brain. It is about pumping your heart. It's about brain sensory attention and like rewiring that crap, which is what yoga and Tai Chi do. Now, there are a couple of other really interesting things with yoga and Tai Chi, which is that they also work on some of this business. Okay, so I'll show you. So I can't scroll up there. So this stuff over here, right? Remember like our business about like the vasoconstriction and baroreceptors and all this kind of stuff. When we do yoga postures like handstands, and when we do these different kinds of postures, what happens is like we dilate and constrict different parts of our vasculature and breathing and like all that kind of stuff like rolls in there. And it somehow like recalibrates that stuff in the positive direction. So what I've observed clinically is that yoga and Tai Chi work on all of these different levels. So there's a sensory attentional component. There's a physiologic component. Like literally, if you think about doing a headstand, right? Like, what's it called? Can't believe I'm blanking on Shirshasana, which is like the headstand posture. What do you think that's doing to your cerebral blood flow? It is changing the way that it is changing the load of cerebral blood flow. And it's changing the way that your vasculature responds to now you've got gravity moving in the opposite direction. If you've got gravity moving in the opposite direction, now your blood vessels need to adapt. Once your blood vessels adapt, you are changing this fixed pattern. Once you change this fixed pattern, we are breaking this cycle. Do y'all get that? So one of the things that we know is that the key to healing, this is my belief, the key to healing psychosomatic illness is re-engaging the adaptive systems of our body and brain. Our body is locked into a cycle, and we need to break that cycle. We can do it mentally through psychotherapy, and we can do it physiologically. And stuff like physiologic reprogramming, exercise helps too. The last thing that we're going to talk about is diet, or brain, gut, and whole body inflammation. So what we know is that this leads to this, and this also leads to things like neurotransmitter precursors. And so by adapting our diets to be low inflammation and eat the right kind of things, and I actually think that, so this is going to be a less evidence-based recommendation, but I love Ayurvedic diet for this kind of stuff. So I think that if you look at it, it's kind of interesting. But, so let's talk about Ayurveda for a second. So earlier, I was a big fan of Ayurveda, and I said Ayurveda was great. And I pointed to a couple of scientific studies, which were actually very weak in their effect size. And people from our community were like, hey, this study isn't very good. So I reread the studies, and I think the science behind Ayurveda is not there. But why do I believe in Ayurveda? So a couple of things. The first is that, remember, we're talking about the linear idiopathogenic idea from Western medicine. One problem causes one disease. Ayurveda is different. Ayurveda believes in systems. So Ayurveda and Chinese medicine do not think that one thing causes one disease. In fact, they think the exact opposite, that any problem is connected to all other problems, and that all these things over here connect to all of this stuff over here. So that's why for mental illness, they give things for the first line Ayurvedic treatment is dietary change. And that's why if you look at Ayurvedic medicine, it's not medicine aimed to treat a disease. It is stuff like ashwagandha. So ashwagandha is in Ayurveda what's called a brain tonic. What does that mean? They're not trying to cure some problem in the brain. What they're trying to do is provide the brain with certain herbs that encourage healing or they just promote the health of the brain. So what do we know about scientific studies of ashwagandha? Scientific studies of ashwagandha demonstrate that ashwagandha induces neuroplasticity. It allows your brain to rewire. Now, it doesn't fix a particular thing. It just allows you to rewire your brain. Now, in what way it rewires, it removes something from read only to edit mode. That's what ashwagandha does in the brain. And if you do that, what kind of benefits will you get? Will it help for trauma? Yeah. Will it help for chronic pain? Yeah. Will it help for anxiety? Yeah. But it is not a treatment for any of those things. And so the problem is that the way that we study Eastern medicine is from this linear idiopathogenic model. And the treatment, so if you go to an Ayurvedic doctor and you say, if a patient has anxiety, what would you give them? They'll say, I'll give them ashwagandha. If they've got dementia, what would you give them? I'll give them ashwagandha. If they've got chronic pain, what would you give them? I'll give them ashwagandha. But it's not a treatment for any of those things. Because in their model, their whole system is different. They think in terms of systems. And so from a diet standpoint, right, so you can use whatever evidence-based diet you want. High fiber, moderate amount of protein. I know a lot of people are in intermittent fasting and ketosis and stuff like that. Jury's still out on that stuff, TBH, right? I think there's like a part of that that's a fad. But Ayurvedic diet, I think, is the best, personally. So this is not, and this is what I explain to my patients, that this is a recommendation. Here's the biological plausibility. There's an ethical component to recommending complementary alternative medicine. And it is to let people know, hey, there are not studies on this. This is why I believe it. Here's the biological plausibility. Here's what the science shows. Here's what the science doesn't show. It is your choice whether you want to engage in it or not. And generally speaking, the recommendations that I make from Ayurveda are more diet related, because there are some medicines in Ayurveda that are toxic. Like they'll give people arsenic and mercury as a part of their medical treatment. So I do not advocate for that. That's why I'm talking about dietary change, right? Because that's where like also there's like evidence-based reasons to recommend it. So usually Ayurvedic diets are also higher in fiber. than the basic like American diet, for example. So there's a lot of evidence-based components to it when I make diet recommendations. But the key thing about Ayurvedic diet is they won't say 3 servings of fruits and vegetables. They'll say that an apple is different from a mango in terms of what it'll do for your body or your brain. But I can make that recommendation. I feel really comfortable as a medical doctor because I explain to my patients that I say, either way, you're getting fruit. And here's the scientific benefits of fruit. There just may be an additional benefit to eating mangoes instead of apples. You want to give it a shot or not? Let's see whether it works for you or doesn't work for you. So when it comes to brain, gut, and inflammation, I think Ayurvedic diet is the best thing to do, personally, right? And that's what I use clinically. Now, if y'all are thinking about instituting dietary changes, you should absolutely talk to your doctor about it because there are other things to consider as well. So this is a long way of talking about if you've got psychosomatic illness. Let's wrap up. First thing to understand is that it's psycho and somatic. There's all kinds of stuff going on in the nervous system with inflammation, with your particular tissues. There's absolutely a upbringing component. And when there is an upbringing component, we send you to psychiatry or psychology, right? Because we're the only ones that really deal with upbringing. So you absolutely need to understand the relationship between your body's signals and your life as a whole. When my body sends the signal, what does it mean to me? How do I make conclusions about it? Second thing we really need to do is improve alexithymia and integrate really our mind into this process. Because for most people who have psychosomatic problems, their mind is removed from the process. It's not that it's weak, it's that, or even that their mind is like, we blind ourselves to a part of it and then we push the rest through. And then that means that a stressor directly impacts our physiology without the mind being able to modulate it. So that's something you need to fix. So whether you want to work on alexithymia, we've got YouTube videos about that. We've got Right in the Fields about that. You want to see a psychotherapist. There's a lot of good benefits to psychotherapy for this kind of stuff. But then the next thing is literally like neuroplasticity kind of stuff. It's restructuring your physiology, restructuring your neuroplasticity so that this cycle gets affected. In mind-body practices, there's studies that show that Tai Chi is effective for fibromyalgia, right? So you can make that recommendation pretty squarely. And we know that yoga and fibromyalgia and stuff are going to help. Yoga and meditation are going to help. So meditation will help too. Exercise will help too. Diet will help too. And now some of y'all may be saying, and what kind of diet? So, y'all can check out Dr. K's guide. We go into more detail about a lot of if y'all are interested in a lot of these systems, you'll get more understanding of it through things like Dr. K's guide. But we don't necessarily focus on that. It's just our perspective on mental health in the mind involves these perspectives, right? So when we have, for example, when we talk about anxiety in our anxiety guide, there's a whole lecture on the physiology of anxiety and meditation practices that harness that physiology. So that if you're trying to conquer anxiety, it is not purely to be conquered in the mind. It is to be conquered through inflammation. It is to be conquered through the brain. It is to be conquered through physiology. And it is to be conquered through the mind. So the other difference is that when I look at mental illness, I do not think of it as mental. All mental illness is psychosomatic. All physical illness is psychosomatic. All illness is psychosomatic. If all illness was not psychosomatic, placebo would not exist. The mind has the capacity. In 1873, there was a French psychiatrist, I believe, who wrote this book called Essays de physiologie philosophique. Butcher the French pronunciation. In this, he had a ward of 80 patients or something, 83 patients, something like that. I forgot the exact number. Bra goes in there and gives them all some medicine. Gives them whatever medicine they have. Then he goes back 15 minutes later and he says, "Oh my God, I have given you the wrong medicine." I can't do a French accent. He says, "I've given you something that will induce vomiting and is to be given to patients after they ingest poison to get the poison out of their body." This was back before the days where we had ethical boards where you can't do this kind of crap to people. 80% of them started vomiting. Oh no, there's a problem with our camera. Let me see if I can switch this. Hold on a second. Okay, we're just going to finish. Oh, GG. Oh, it's back. Okay, I'm going to just turn this off real quick. And then let us... What am I going to do? Let's try turning it off, turning it back on. We good? We good? GG? GG'd out. Okay. So let's just... Oh, we were there for a second. We'll figure that out later. All right, let's go back to this, okay? So, and 80% of the people that he gave this medicine to ended up... Hold on a second. Let me do this. Give me a second. One second, chat. My face. Oh my God, my face. All right. This is the best it's going to get, chat. You guys get to see this. Okay? Okay. So this French doctor tells him that it's going to induce vomiting, and 80% of them vomit. So all illness is psychosomatic because the mind is integrated into the rest of the body. And so if you all really want to conquer this stuff, you must educate yourself in all of these systems, because the basic weakness in our system of medicine, there's some PCPs, by the way, that are really good at this stuff. They've basically become psychosomatic specialists. Is that it's like trans organ system. So it's like lots of different organ systems rolled into one. And why did I get good at it? Because everyone's like, psychotherapy works. But just because psychotherapy works doesn't mean that it's mental. It just means that the mind can have an effect. So what I strongly recommend that y'all do, first of all, don't give up hope. The reason that crap doesn't work is because we haven't understood this stuff. It doesn't mean that the disease is not treatable, or that even you can theoretically be cured. So instead, what you really got to do is leverage everything that you've got, right? You have to work on all of these levels, on the gut microbiome level. And I've had patients, by the way, that have had really great PCPs that did really weird stuff. Like, I don't recommend this, but, the guy did something off-label, which is he gave a course of antibiotics, busted up my patient's gut bacteria, and then gave them a very specific course of probiotics. And basically went like nuclear on the gut bacteria and then repopulated, rapid expanded into the space. And this patient had IBS for like 15 years and has not had symptoms since. Right? But then you also have to maintain good diet and stuff to keep your gut bacteria healthy. But there's all kinds of stuff out there. So don't give up hope. And use as many of these mechanisms as you can. Whether it's mental and going to see a psychotherapist. And by the way, we didn't talk about pharmacology, but pharmacology can absolutely be helpful as well, right? So we showed, for example, that Nature review, which showed that beta blockers can help, octreotide can help, like all these different kinds of medicines can help. The problem is that they're going to fix one piece of that. So all that stuff is good. And it's not even like, and this is what I'm saying, is that there's a fundamental problem with the way that we practice Western medicine, which doesn't make it the cardiologist's fault. Right? It's not that your cardiologist is bad or anything. They're great, but they're really good at doing what they're good at. Like, it's like, we may not be very good at psychosomatic illness, but you can literally we can take your heart out of your body and give you a new one. You can have completely non-functioning kidneys and we can hook you up to an artificial kidney 3 times a week and keep you alive for like 15 years. So we're really good at what we're good at. It's in these non-linear idiopathogenic diseases that Western medicine really struggles. But the other thing that I want y'all to think about is everything that I've been able to teach you today. I'm not talking to you about doshas and energy and, prana and all this kind of stuff. Everything I'm talking to y'all about today is science, right? Where did I learn all this stuff? This is all like, this is good stuff, man. Fibromyalgia, alexithymia and somatization, right? POTS. Like, we have lots of cool studies. We're finally figuring out, Western science is figuring all this stuff out, that it's more complicated than we thought, right? So give yourselves a shot, learn about it by all means. And don't give up hope. Talk to your doctor, go see a therapist, start meditating, do yoga. And this is where you're going to say, but Dr. K, you're just basically saying yoga, meditation, diet, go see your doctor, and exercise is the answer. Yes. Yes. But that's what everyone says to do. That's what everyone says to do because it works. The problem, what I sort of find when I explain this stuff, is people don't understand how it works, right? They're like, exercise feels bad. And everyone's trying to exercise because y'all want to exercise so that you can look fit. No one's exercising to reprogram your internal physiology and fix paradoxical vasoconstriction. If you want to fucking look fit and impress people, take a picture and apply a filter. The rest of the internet is doing it anyway. If you want to rewire your brain and your physiology, then do exercise, yoga, and meditation. Not for fucking likes on Instagram. Understand that if you want to heal your body, you have to heal your body. What kind of answer are you looking for? Are you looking for a pill to take? Looking for a pill to take or one thing to do to fix all of your problems is what Western medicine excels at and what got us into this problem in the first place. It's not your fault that you were abused or traumatized or become alexithymic or your karma or whatever. But this is the body and mind and brain that you live with today. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Because unfortunately, my profession has dropped the ball. We have tons of patients who go to doctors and doctors don't take them seriously. My symptoms are real. I feel bloated all the time. The doctor's like, I don't know what to do about that. Go see a therapist. It's very demeaning. And also, we don't know what to do about that because that's not how we're trained. We can try this medicine. We can try this medicine. Well, medicine ain't going to fix it. The stuff, hopefully that'll change one day. I'm optimistic. Medicine's going to help. But it ain't like cystic fibrosis where you can replace the gene and everything will happen. Right? It's not like antibiotics. Like, there's some stuff that is whole body. And as doctors, like I said, there's some PCPs that are really good at this. But generally speaking, we're not good at whole body medicine. So good luck. Yeah, so Ricky Brooks is saying, interesting, sounds fake, see a shrink. It's just that shrinks are good at harnessing the power of the mind. And the power of the mind will help any organ of your body. Right? And we haven't been able to find a smoking gun for these illnesses in Western medicine. And since we can't find a smoking gun, we can't make a bulletproof vest. Because we need to know, okay, if you can give us a smoking gun, then we can fix it. That's what we're really good at. We're like, hey, your knee is busted. Let me give you a new one. That's how good we are at Western medicine. It's amazing. But when there's not a discrete problem, that's where our weakness lies. And that's where, unfortunately, y'all have to step up and you have to take responsibility for your own health on this stuff. Because I don't think that us doctors, there's just so many advances that we have to keep up with. We can't keep up with everything. So look here, it's you. Exercise made my condition worse. Thank you for sharing that. So that's the other thing, is one thing I hope I've shared with y'all is that while all of this stuff in general works, there are particular constellations of this stuff, and not everything will work for everyone. So for example, in POTS, People with POTS have exercise intolerance. And exercise in the short term can exacerbate their symptoms. But what we also know from POTS is that physical deconditioning worsens POTS. So you're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, where doing the thing will make you worse, but not doing the thing will make you worse over time. And that's exactly why y'all need to go see an actual professional to help you navigate those nuances. Yeah, so when people say POTS makes me so annoyed because working out will feel like hell, that's what it does. And that's why I would recommend like y'all try something else like yoga or Tai Chi, or see if there's some other kind of physical activity that you can do, or even something like, you don't have to work out, right? That's where like, and that's what, talk to your doctor and see if there's other stuff that you can do that'll be physiologically better. And if you talk to someone who's like a POTS specialist, maybe they'll know, maybe they'll say something like, oh yeah, like, I don't know, like going swimming could be better. Who knows? Video's blurry today. That's because my camera just went out. Okay. So who are we rating, chat? Or actually, let's do like questions for 5 minutes and then we are out. Hopefully that was helpful. Is this stream going to be uploaded? Definitely. I feel confident about that. Which asana can address chronic cough? I'm not too sure. I don't know if there's one. How do I get my patients to meditate? Motivational interviewing. Do you get compassion fatigue from my career choice? No. Not yet. Do you have good resources for folks who suffer from IBS? Not yet. So this is the beginning, chat. This is not the end. So I'm tempted to do like deep dives into each of these and go into details about each one. Do your coaches know about your takes on psychosomatic issues? They do now. Do you think fibromyalgia is overdiagnosed? No, I do not. Resources for tinnitus? Stay tuned. Deep dive into tinnitus coming in the next couple months, hopefully. If y'all are wondering, like, why does it take me a couple months? Just so y'all understand. So this right here are the papers that I read for psychosomatic illness. It's, I don't know, like maybe like 60, 80 pages in the last 3 days. This does not include all the other stuff that I read. This is just the stuff that I printed out. I read a bunch of stuff, printed out some of it, took notes. So we probably go through about 100 to 200 pages, or maybe if this one is even more, I would say like 300 pages for this deep dive of scientific literature. So tinnitus takes time. Like we're doing a lot. So it just takes time. Yeah, reading all this stuff. Oh, you know why we read this stuff? So that y'all don't have to. Is acquiring a normal doctor difficult? It shouldn't be hard. Just got to call people and show up. Usually what it takes. Yeah, lawyer grind, right? Okay. All right, who are we rating, chat? How do I raid? Manage stream. Okay, there we go. Imperial Hal? We can raid Ryan Higa. We haven't raided Ryan in a while. Is Ryan Higa streaming? It's Ryan Higa, right? Okay, we'll raid Ryan. Playing some Valorant. So we will... Okay, so we'll see y'all tomorrow. Hopefully I can fix my camera. I don't know what happened with it, but yeah. Take care, everybody. Hopefully this was helpful. Send it to your friends. If y'all know anyone who's struggling with IBS, by all means, share this with them. Last question about kombucha. So kombucha can help, right? So kombucha works on this like gut inflammation, gut bacteria kind of stuff, but it's like complicated is the answer, but it can help is the short answer. I think that some of the health benefits of kombucha are underrated, and some of the health benefits I think are oversold. So we'll maybe talk about kombucha at some point.